Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, and as we head into the new year, I've taken the liberty of using my Clairvoyance EX to help you guys figure out what servants you may want to be saving for. And surprisingly enough, despite next year having a reputation for being slow event-wise, that lack of energy doesn't carry over to the servants, because oh boy are there some major game changers coming out next year. So many so that narrowing it down to just 10 was a lot harder than I expected. So if you don't see your favorite servant on this list, don't take it to mean that they're bad, because I had to snub a lot of otherwise good servants. With that said though, feel free to share your top 10 upcoming servants in the comments down below. And while you're making your way down to the comment section, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so that you can catch all of my FGO videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. But without further ado, let's get on to the list. Rounding out our list at number 10, we have Saito Hajime. Hajime will be dropping with Guda Guda 5 in early October. He is a single target arts crit DPS who is notable for his crit self-sufficiency. Not only is he able to generate his own stars, both through his high hit counts and his skills, but he also has a whopping 100% crit damage buff on a very short cooldown. So he's capable of delivering some very high burst damage. And of course, as a crit arts DPS, he has excellent NP gain, but one other aspect of Hajime's playstyle that sets him apart from other arts DPSs are his very low cooldowns. Most of Hajime's skills have very high uptime, which means that his damage will stay consistent for most of the battle with no major drop-offs. Unfortunately, in order to compensate for such an extraordinary skill set, Hajime has some of the worst Ascension mat requirements I have ever seen. Seriously, I don't know what god he pissed off to get Ascension mat requirements like this, but suffice it to say, he is very difficult to level. He is also somewhat overshadowed by Saber Hokusai and Saber Lancelot, who perform a similar role, with Saber Hokusai even being a free-to-play servant. Still though, being a 4-star, he is relatively easier to pick up than most of the other servants on this list, and he makes for an excellent high damage boss killer or a main DPS servant in Castoria teams. And we're not done with 4 stars just yet. Speaking of summer welfares, coming in at number 9, we have Consort U Lancer, who will be the welfare servant releasing for the summer 2022 event in early August. Consort U may be the free servant, but don't confuse free for weak. In fact, Consort U makes a case for being one of the best 4-star Lancers in the whole game. She has an incredibly powerful single target quick noble phantasm that deals a whole bunch of additional bonus damage against male enemies. And because she's a free NP5 servant, she is likely going to be the strongest anti-male servant for many players. But damage isn't the only thing that Yu's good for. She also has great utility with a taunt, a party-wide crit buff, targetable noble phantasm charge, and she's also able to apply burn and curse to enemies. And as a side note, she also has some very exciting animations. Just about Summer Yu's only drawback is that she does have some battlefield dependent skills. Her first skill only works at full power when she is in a waterside or sunlight battlefield, which does limit her just a little bit. However, she's still an excellent pickup for anyone looking for a multi-purpose quick DPS or just a very strong anti-male servant. And coming in at number 8 is our first 5-star servant of the list, Dioscuri, aka Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are going to drop with the Olympus banner in early April. They are a saber servant with an incredible amount of utility built into their kits. Most notably their first skill, Stars of the Chief God, which is a unique buff that grants their quick cards the ability to charge their NP gauge, and their arts cards the ability to generate crit stars. This on top of their already good base NP gain and star generating makes them one of the best sabers in the game when it comes to NP looping and generating a ridiculous amount of crit stars. In fact, Castor and Pollux's NP spamming capability is so strong that they can even loop outside of Castoria teams, and they loop incredibly consistently when using them all on their own, which makes them a powerful solo unit. They also have a plethora of unique damage buffs built into their active and passive skills, which allows their noble phantasm to hit incredibly hard. Unfortunately, they can be a bit difficult to use since a lot of their skills require proper timing as well as a little bit of card RNG. But if you're in the market for a strong solo servant or a main arts DPS, then I would highly recommend taking a look at these twins. And while on the topic of difficult to use servants, at number 7 we have Van Gogh, a servant that I know a lot of you are looking forward to. Van Gogh is a foreigner who's going to be releasing with the Imaginary Scramble event in early November. And the best way to sum up Van Gogh is as a quick foreigner version of Super Orion. Van Gogh is a quick crit DPS who relies on using her Noble Phantasm to buff up her crit damage so that she can deal absolutely ludicrous amounts of crit DPS, easily hitting for over 100,000 with each crit. However, what separates Van Gogh from Super Orion is Van Gogh's very unique playstyle. In order to spam out her Noble Phantasm and buff herself, Van Gogh actually needs to debuff her party and her enemies with curse damage. She can then manipulate that curse damage into buffs for herself. If the curses are managed correctly, Van Gogh can be an absolute beast, but if they aren't managed correctly, she can be hard to use. This makes her a bit more niche than even Super Orion since she's incredibly dependent on curse builds. And she also needs some very strong quick supports like Double Scotty to work most effectively. But if you're someone who wants to play a servant with an incredibly unique playstyle, or who just happens to love crit DPS servants, then Van Gogh is the servant for you. But Van Gogh isn't the only foreigner on this list, because at number 6 we have Yang Guifei. Yang is releasing in New Year's of 2022, which means she's likely already out by the time you're watching this video. And if she is, you should definitely consider rolling for her. Yang is an excellent damage dealer, who also has the benefit of being incredibly tanky. Much like Van Gogh, Yang has a very specific gimmick that she relies on in order to deal a ton of damage. This time, the gimmick being Burn. Against burned enemies, Yang can be an incredibly strong DPS servant, while still being one of FGO's only true tanks. Of course, this means that she is countered by stuff like debuff immunity, and she also suffers from very long cooldowns and a high skill floor, very much like Van Gogh. Though I do give her the edge over Van Gogh for being a lot easier to use. That being said though, if you like stall teams and tanks, or if you're just someone who needs an arts all-rounder, Yang might be one of the best pickups you can get this year. And topping off our top 5, we have Himiko. This 5-star ruler comes out with Gouda 5 in early October. And like many other servants on this list, Himiko is a crit DPS. I wonder if there's a theme to the servants releasing this year. However, unlike the other servants I mentioned in this list, Himiko does have a couple more things going for her. For one thing, she is a buster crit servant, which adds a little more power to her crits. And secondly, she's a ruler, which gives her immense natural tankiness, very much like Luvia. But while Himiko is capable of some very high damage output herself, she can also work as an excellent off support, increasing buster and crit damage significantly for the whole party with her Noble Phantasm. This makes her an excellent choice as a secondary DPS in many crit teams, since she is capable of majorly bolstering the team's damage while also dealing damage herself and tanking hits. But while she can be very effective in a multitude of roles, she is edged out in damage and utility by more traditional DPS or support servants, especially some of the ones coming up on this list. But I would heavily recommend not overlooking Himiko, because she is an underrated servant who excels as both a buster crit DPS and a support. From one buster crit servant to another, at number 4 is Romulus, who drops with Olympus in mid-April. Not to be confused with his 3-star counterpart, this SSR version of Romulus is much more intimidating. He's essentially Himiko on steroids, mixed with a little bit of Van Gogh. You see, Romulus is able to apply the unique Roman trait to enemies and allies alike, and the more Roman stacks that he applies to enemies and allies, the more he's able to damage them or buff them respectively. This means that Romulus is able to bestow powerful crit and attack buffs to anyone in his party, while also being capable of incredibly high damage if he can apply enough stacks, allowing him to very effectively play the role of semi-support or even main DPS. His cooldowns are also criminally low, so applying the Roman trait isn't that hard for him to do at all, and he is very consistent at it. That said though, it still takes a little bit of time for those Roman stacks to accumulate, so Romulus does suffer from a little bit of a slow build up to his damage. But once he's there, he can go off. For that reason, much like Himiko, I recommend him to anyone looking to build a buster crit team and in need of a DPS or semi-support to build around. And fittingly enough, Himiko and Romulus have excellent synergy together, so why not both? Slithering her way to number 3 is Ibuki. This Saber class snake releases at the end of the year in mid-December with Lost Belt 5.5. Ibuki is a, say it with me now, Buster DPS. But unlike the previous 2 entries, she's a little more NP focused than crit focused, and that's what makes her so incredibly powerful. To sum it up, Ibuki is basically a Saber version of Ishtar. She has an incredibly powerful AoE attack that is even stronger than some single target NPs, and she has an incredibly broken 50% NP charge battery that actually allows her to loop her Noble Phantasm easily in a lot of team comps. This gives Ibuki unmatched versatility for wave clearing when it comes to Buster Servants, since she can easily clear 2 powerful enemy waves with very little setup. So despite being a Buster Servant, she is an excellent farmer. And this is pre-Vich, so she only gets even stronger with time. But it doesn't end there. Ibuki still packs a lot of punch for an AoE servant, and she has surprisingly good utility built into her kit in the form of an NP seal on her skills and defense and invincibility pierce on her Noble Phantasm. So she is absolutely viable for challenge quests and boss fights in the Lost Belts. She does have low versatility, being essentially just a giant beatstick with no defensive skills, but that hardly matters when she's one of the best beatsticks in the game. There are just so many reasons to go for Ibuki. She's a top tier farmer, excellent boss killer, and she scales very well into the Vich era later on. Only one DPS servant this year manages to outclass Ibuki in my opinion, and that's our number 2 spot, Domon. Ironically, Domon releases just a week earlier than Ibuki in early December, also for Lost Belt 5.5. He is a quick-focused AoE alter ego who fittingly enough feels like an amalgamation of every other DPS servant on this list, but dialed up to an 11. There are few things that Domon doesn't excel at. Firstly, he is a crit DPS, shocker, who is able to provide incredibly powerful buffs to himself and the party, buffing crit damage by up to 100% and attack by up to 40% for 3 turns. The buffs only apply to chaotic or evil allies, however, a huge amount of servants fall into one of those 2 categories, and Domon himself is both chaotic and evil, so he receives the full benefits. In addition to those massive buffs for the party though, he can also debuff enemies with defense down and attack down. And if that weren't enough, Domon himself also has an 80% NP charge, which allows him to be a very potent NP looper, especially in Scotty teams. So all in all, Domon is a servant who can deal incredible amounts of crit damage, hand out crazy strong buffs to the party, and has almost unmatched farming capabilities. Yeah, pretty strong. The only factor that somewhat balances Domon's broken kit are his significantly long cooldowns, which do limit his effectiveness in longer fights. Regardless though, Domon should be your number 1 choice if you don't have an effective Scotty looper, or if you want a powerful quick DPS to build around, or if you just have a bunch of chaotic or evil servants that you really like to use. Now, I don't normally do honorable mentions, but I feel like this is a very special exception. Muramasa is technically a 2023 servant since he does release on New Year's Day, so he shouldn't technically be a part of this list. But practically speaking, his release is within 3 weeks of Ibuki and Domon, and if he released 24 hours earlier than he did, he would have beaten them both on this list. So do with that information what you will, but I'll save the details on him for next time. See you on next year's list, Muramasa. And at number 1, who else could it be but Castoria? Castoria is without a doubt next year's biggest servant, and she'll be dropping right with our 5th anniversary in early July. If you somehow aren't in the know, Castoria is undisputably not only the best servant of next year, but the best servant in all of FGO. She's an art support with unrivaled buffing capabilities. Most notably, she single-handedly enables almost every art servant in the game to loop through the use of her targetable 50% NP battery, her art card buff, and her NP gain buff. And unlike Scotty, she is also extremely easy to use and free-to-play friendly, enabling efficient farming compositions with even low rarity and NP1 servants. so any player is capable of taking full advantage of her. And not only is she the best farming support in the game, but she also acts as an excellent challenge quest support as well, since she's the only servant who can provide an unpierceable form of invincibility, aka true invincibility, to the whole party, as well as a multitude of damage buffs for increasing team-wide DPS. And she even enables many single target art servants like Castoria and Saber Hokusai to loop their NPs. Imagine combining Scotty's skill set with a better version of Jean's Noble Phantasm and Merlin's damage buffs, and then adding all of those onto one servant, and you have a good idea of what Castoria can do. Castoria is truly meta-defining. She does so much and works with so many servants that I think everyone playing FGO should prioritize rolling for her. So if you aren't saving your quartz already, I'd advise starting now. And those are my thoughts on the best servants releasing next year. As always, these are just my opinions, so feel free to give me your own top 10 list down below in the comments, and let me know who you're most looking forward to this year. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really liked the video. And if you haven't already, do please follow us on Twitter, follow us on Twitch, and join the party on our Discord, all linked in the description down below. And until next time, this is Soberoni, signing out. Later.